Rain fell over St. Augustine's Cemetery the way it always did when Marisol Vance sang for the dead. Soft at first, then steady, like the sky itself needed a moment to compose itself before the service began. She stood beneath the green canopy in her black dress, the one that had been let out twice at the seams because her body refused to apologize for taking up space, and she watched the casket lower while her voice rose. It was an old gospel melody, the kind her grandmother used to hum while frying catfish on Sunday afternoons, and Marisol let it carry through the wet air until even the funeral director closed his eyes. She didn't notice him until the song ended. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, beneath a black umbrella, far enough from the mourners that he could have been mistaken for a stranger paying respects to someone else entirely. Tall, broad-shouldered, a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit men who never had to ask the price. He didn't move when the crowd began to disperse. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply watched her, the way a man watches a fire he's trying to decide whether to put out or feed. It wasn't the first time. Marisol had seen him before, at a funeral 2 months ago, and one before that, and another back in the spring. Different families, different caskets, different grief. But always the same man, always at the back, always gone before she could ask anyone who he was. This time, as she packed away her sheet music, an old woman in a wheelchair rolled up beside her, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "That's a gift you have, baby," the woman said. "My sister would have loved that song." "Thank you, ma'am," Marisol said softly. "I'm so sorry for your loss." The woman's gaze drifted past Marisol's shoulder toward the man under the umbrella, and her expression shifted. Just slightly, just enough. "Lord," she muttered, "Cole's boy is here again." Marisol's hand stilled on the zipper of her music bag. "Cole, Damien Cole." The woman lowered her voice as if the rain itself might carry the name somewhere dangerous. "You don't know who that is?" "No, ma'am." The old woman looked at her for a long moment, then shook her head slowly, like she was deciding whether Marisol's ignorance was a blessing or the beginning of something terrible. "Best you keep it that way, sugar," she said, and let her grandson wheel her toward the waiting cars. Marisol turned back toward the gravesite. The umbrella was gone. The man was gone. Only the rain remained, falling steadily over freshly turned earth, and Marisol stood there longer than she should have, the name Damien Cole settling into her chest like a stone dropped into still water, sinking slowly, but sinking all the way down. She didn't think about him again until 3 days later, when the envelope arrived. It was tucked beneath the door of Delacroix Funeral Home, where Marisol had worked since she was 19, first sweeping floors and arranging flowers, now singing for nearly every service that came through. Odalise Delacroix, the silver-haired woman who'd run the place for 40 years and treated Marisol like the granddaughter she'd never had, found the envelope first. "This came for you," Odalise said, holding it out with the careful suspicion of a woman who'd seen every kind of trouble walk through her doors. No name on it, no stamp. Inside was a check. The amount alone made Marisol's breath catch. Enough to cover the funeral home's overdue property taxes, the ones Odalise had been quietly losing sleep over for months, the ones that threatened to hand the building over to the city if they weren't paid by the end of the month. There was no note, no signature, just a check, and beneath it, a single photograph, Marisol, mid-song at the funeral 3 days ago. Someone had been close enough to take it without her noticing. "Who would?" Odalise started. "I don't know," Marisol said, though something cold and certain was already settling in her stomach. She thought of the umbrella, the charcoal suit, the old woman's warning. "Best you keep it that way." "Sugar." Marisol folded the photograph and slid it into her pocket, where it sat like a coal against her hip for the rest of the day. Marisol Vance had grown up believing 2 things about herself, and both of them were lies she'd spent years mistaking for truth. The first was that she'd never be the kind of woman men looked at twice. Not with her hips, not with the soft roundness of her arms, not with a body that didn't fold itself into the shapes magazines insisted on. She'd learned to make herself small in other ways instead. Quiet voice in daylight, big voice only when grief gave her permission to be loud. The second lie was about her father. Elias Vance had worked the docks for 15 years, coming home every night smelling of salt and diesel, swinging Marisol around the kitchen until she shrieked with laughter, And then when she was 16, he simply didn't come home. No goodbye. No note. Her mother had cried for a week and then stopped speaking his name altogether. And Marisol had grown up believing the quiet, ugly truth that some men just leave, that love was a thing you trust to stay, no matter how hard you held on to it. She carried that belief into every relationship since. Like armor she'd forged herself and never taken off. Now her mother was gone too, heart attack, for years back, and it was just Marisol and her younger brother, Theo, 19 years old, and fighting a battle with his kidneys that neither of them could afford. Dialysis 3 times a week. A transplant list that moved slower than the Mississippi in August. Bills that arrived faster than Marisol's paychecks ever could. So when a check appeared with no explanation, attached to a photograph of her singing, attached to a name that made an old woman lower her voice in a cemetery, Marisol didn't throw it away. She went looking for answers instead. The Cole family's legitimate business, at least the one with a sign out front, was a shipping company on the riverfront. All glass and steel rising out of a neighborhood that still had bullet holes in some of its older brick. Marisol stood across the street for 20 minutes before she worked up the nerve to cross. The receptionist inside took one look at her and said, "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Marisol admitted. "I need to speak with Damien Cole." "Mr. Cole doesn't take walk-ins." "Tell him it's about a check," Marisol said, and something in her voice, steady, unwavering, the same voice she used to steady grieving families at gravesides, made the receptionist pause. 15 minutes later, Marisol was sitting in an office on the top floor, and Damien Cole was standing at the window with his back to her, looking out over the river. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that made him seem older, like a man who'd been carrying weight since he was a boy and had simply built enough muscle to hide the strain. When he turned, his eyes were a dark, careful brown, and they moved over her face the way a man reads something he's read 100 times before, searching for a word he might have missed. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "I assume you got my check." "I assume you've been following me," Marisol countered. "Following implies I had to look hard." A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. "You sing every Sunday at Delacroix's. You've sung at 6 funerals this year. I attended 5 of them." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He walked to his desk, sat on the edge of it, and studied her with an intensity that made Marisol want to fold her arms over her chest, not from cold, but from the sudden, unwelcome feeling of being seen, fully, in a way she wasn't used to. "Because your voice," he said finally, "sounds like my mother's." Marisol blinked. "Your mother's?" "She used to sing. A long time ago." Something flickered behind his eyes. Grief, old and carefully buried. "She'd been gone 17 years. I don't get to hear that kind of music anymore unless I go looking for it." He paused. "I wasn't trying to frighten you. I'm sorry if I did. The check is yours. No strings." He met her eyes. "I know about the property taxes. I know about your brother's medical bills. Consider a donation from someone who's grateful for what you do. People don't give away that kind of money for nothing, Mr. Cole." "No," he agreed. "They don't." But he didn't explain further, and Marisol, against every instinct that kept her safe for 28 years, found that she wanted to know more. What began as suspicion became, over the following weeks, something far more complicated. Damien requested, formally, through Odalise, with another check attached, this one for a private performance, that Marisol sing a memorial gathering for his mother, held quietly every year on the anniversary of her death, attended by no one but Damien and a handful of old family retainers. Marisol almost said no. Odalise, practical as ever, reminded her that the funeral home's roof needed replacing and pride didn't pay contractors. So Marisol went. The gathering was held in a walled garden behind the Cole estate. Old oaks, Spanish moss, a marble bench worn smooth by years of someone sitting alone. Marisol sang an ode hymn, soft and unaccompanied, and when she finished, she found Damien sitting on the bench with his head bowed, his hands clasped between his knees, looking less like the man who ran one of the most feared organizations in the city, and more like a boy who'd lost his mother and never been allowed to grieve properly. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "You don't have to thank me for doing my job. I'm not thanking you for the song. He looked up. I'm thanking you for not asking questions while you sang it. Everyone always wants to ask questions. Marisol sat down beside him. Not too close, but close enough that the silence between them felt less like a wall and more like a held breath. I'm good at not asking questions, she said. It's a survival skill in my line of work. Grieving people don't want to be studied. They want to be allowed to fall apart in peace. And you give them that. I try. He looked at her for a long moment. Who gives you that, Marisol? No one had asked her that question in years. Marisol felt something crack open in her chest, small but undeniable, and she didn't have an answer. So she said nothing at all, and Damien didn't push. It became a pattern after that. He'd request a private song, always with some excuse, an anniversary, a memory, a name he wanted spoken aloud one more time. She'd sing. They'd talk afterward, careful and slow, like two people testing ice they weren't sure would hold. He told her about growing up in a house where love was something you earned through obedience. She told him about a father who'd vanished without a word, and a mother who'd taught her that love always came with an expiration date. He just left, Marisol said one evening, staring at the dark garden. No goodbye. 16 years old. And I came home from school, and his side of the closet was empty. My mother never talked about it. I think it broke something in her she never fixed. Damien was quiet for a long moment. What was his name? Elias, Marisol said. Elias Vance. Something shifted in Damien's face. So brief, so controlled, that Marisol almost missed it. But she didn't miss it. She filed away, the way she filed away every small inconsistency in grieving families who weren't telling her the whole truth, and she didn't know yet what it meant, only that it meant something. The first time Vivian Casel cornered Marisol, it was outside a charity gala Damien had insisted she attend, his date, though neither of them had used that word out loud. Vivian was beautiful in a way that took money and time and a complete absence of doubt. Sleek, dark hair, a red dress that fit like it had been poured onto her, and eyes that swept over Marisol with the cool efficiency of someone calculating a threat. You're the singer, Vivian said. It wasn't a question. Marisol Vance. Vivian Castel. She let the name sit there, clearly expecting recognition. When Marisol's expression didn't change, Vivian's smile sharpened. My family and the Coles have been allied for 30 years. Damien and I were promised each other when I was 12 years old. Did he mention that? No, Marisol said evenly. He didn't. He wouldn't. Damien doesn't like talking about things he can't control. Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice to something almost gentle, almost kind, which made it worse. I'm sure you're very talented. I heard you sing at his mother's memorial. Lovely, really, but you should know what you are to him. Sweetheart, you're a song he plays when he's sad. That's all. When this family needs him to be serious, he'll remember exactly what he owes and who he owes it to. And it won't be a funeral singer with a flattering figure and a sad story. The words landed exactly where Vivian intended them to land. On every insecurity Marisol had spent her whole life trying to outrun. She felt her face flush, felt the old, familiar shame rise in her throat. But Marisol had spent 12 years standing beside caskets, watching people say the cruelest things to each other in the name of grief, and she learned that the loudest cruelty usually came from the most frightened people. You're scared of me, Marisol said quietly. That's interesting. Vivian's smile faltered, just barely. I hope you find whatever it is you're actually looking for, Miss Castel, Marisol said, and walked away before her hands could start shaking. It was 3 weeks later that the first real crack appeared. Theo's dialysis center called Marisol at work, confused. His account had been paid in full, 6 months in advance, by an anonymous donor. The funeral home's new roof, which Odalise had been quietly saving for, had been installed a week prior by a contractor who refused to bill them, citing an account already settled. And when Marisol finally pulled the thread, calling the dialysis center, asking pointed questions, getting a name from a flustered billing clerk who hadn't been told to keep it secret, the name on the wire transfer was a shell company owned, 3 layers down by Cole Maritime Holdings. Marisol sat in her car outside the dialysis center for a long time, hands tight on the wheel, something in her chest twisting between gratitude and fury. He'd been paying for everything, quietly, completely, for months, and he let her believe it was one check, one gesture, nothing more. She drove straight to the coal estate. Damien was in his study when she walked in without knocking, and whatever he saw on her face made him rise from his desk immediately. "Marisol, you've been paying for Theo's treatment," she said. "For months. The roof, the taxes, all of it. You let me think it was one check. I didn't want you to feel. Like a charity case?" Her voice cracked. "Like a project? Like something you're fixing, because it makes you feel better about whatever guilt you're carrying?" Damien flinched. A real flinch. The kind that comes from a wound being pressed exactly where it hurts most. And in that flinch, Marisol saw something she hadn't let herself see before. Guilt. Not the soft, generalized guilt of a rich man easing his conscience. Something specific. Something old. "What guilt, Damien?" she asked, quieter now. Dangerous now. "What are you not telling me?" For a long moment, he said nothing. And then he walked to a locked drawer in his desk, took out an old photograph, and held it out to her with hands that, for the first time since she'd met him, were not steady. It was a photograph of 3 men standing on a dock, laughing, arms slung over each other's shoulders. One of them was a much younger Damien, 19, maybe 20, the hard edges of the man Marisol knew not yet formed. Another was an older man Marisol didn't recognize. The third was her father. "His name was Elias Vance," Damien said, and his voice had gone hollow. "He worked the docks for my father. He was the best man I ever knew, growing up, kinder to me than my own father ever was." He swallowed. 12 years ago, my father found out Elias had been talking to federal investigators, building a case. Records, names, dates, enough to bury half the operation, including my father. Marisol's hands had gone numb. The photograph trembled between her fingers. "My father gave the order," Damien continued, each word costing him something visible, "and he made me carry it out. 19 years old. And he put a gun in my hand and told me it was the only way I'd ever earn my place." His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded for the first time. "I didn't pull the trigger, Marisol. I swear to God, I didn't. But I was there. I drove the car. I watched it happen, and I never said a word, and I have spent 12 years telling myself that not pulling the trigger made me innocent." The room tilted. Marisol heard a sound and realized, distantly, that it was her own breath, ragged and broken. "He didn't leave us," she whispered. "My father didn't leave us." "No," Damien said. "He never would have. He's been dead this whole time. My mother died thinking he abandoned her. I grew up thinking." Marisol's voice shattered completely. "I grew up thinking love just leaves, Damien. I built my whole life around that. And it was a lie. It was your family's lie. Marisol, don't." She backed toward the door, the photograph still clutched in her fist. 12 years of grief rewriting itself in real time, twisting into something sharper and far more dangerous. "Don't you dare say my name like you have any right to comfort me." She left him standing in his study, and she didn't look back. For 3 days, Marisol didn't sing. She sat with her mother's old photograph spread across the kitchen table, staring at her father's face. Young, smiling, alive in a way she convinced herself he'd stopped being long before he actually had. Theo found her there on the second night, and when she told him the truth, he was quiet for a long time. "That's not your fault, Mari," he said finally. "None of it. Not believing it. Not him being gone. None of it." "I let him pay for everything," Marisol said. "I let him into our lives, and his family is the reason Dad—" She couldn't finish it. "Did he kill Dad?" "No. His father did. He was just a kid, 19, scared, doing what he was told." Theo studied her with the kind of clarity that 19-year-olds sometimes had, the kind that cut through grief faster than people twice their age. "So he spent 12 years trying to make it right, without ever telling you why. That doesn't sound like the man who did it, Mari. That sounds like the only person in that family who never stopped feeling guilty." Marisol didn't answer, but she didn't sleep that night either. And somewhere around 3 a.m, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she hadn't saved. "There's something else you need to know. Please, 5 minutes." She almost didn't go, but Odalise, of all people, was the one who convinced her. "Baby, I've been doing this job 40 years, the older woman said, pouring 2 cups of coffee at 5 in the morning while Marisol sat hollow-eyed at the funeral home's kitchen table. "And I've learned that the people who run from the truth carry it heavier than the people who face it. Whatever he has to say, you go hear it. Then you decide what to do with it. But don't let 12 years of not knowing turn into a lifetime of not knowing on purpose." So Marisol went. Damien looked like he hadn't slept either. Jacket gone, sleeves rolled, dark circles under his eyes. He didn't try to explain himself again. Instead, he handed her a small wooden box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. In handwriting Marisol recognized instantly, careful, looping, the same handwriting that used to write "I love you" Maribug on birthday cards. "My father had these," Damien said quietly. "I found them 4 years ago, going through his old files after he died. Your father wrote them the months before he died. Copies of what he'd given the investigators, and letters he never got to send. To your mother, to you and Theo. He knew it was dangerous, what he was doing. He wrote these in case he didn't make it home." Damien's voice broke just slightly. "My father kept them. I think he wanted proof of what he'd done, in case he ever needed leverage. Some kind of insurance. I don't know, but I found them, and I read every word, and I spent every day since trying to figure out how to give them back to you, without you hating me for what my family took." Marisol's hand shook as she opened the topmost letter. "To my Marisol," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home, and there's nothing in this world I regret more than that. But I need you to know I would do it again, every time, because the world your brother grows up in matters more than the years I might have had left in it. Don't ever let anyone make you small, baby girl. You were never made to be small." Marisol pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Not the careful, contained grief she performed at gravesides of strangers, but something raw and enormous. 12 years of misunderstanding pouring out her all at once. Damien didn't touch her. He simply sat with her, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room, until the worst of it passed. "I'm not asking you to forgive my family," he said eventually, voice low. "I'm not even sure I've forgiven them, but I needed you to have these. You deserve to know who your father really was." Marisol looked up at him, eyes raw, and for the first time since she'd learned the truth, she didn't see the Cole name when she looked at him. She just saw Damien, the boy who'd been handed a gun before he was old enough to refuse it, who'd spent his whole adult life quietly trying to undo what he could never fully undo. 12 years, she whispered. "You've been carrying this for 12 years. "It's not enough," Damien said. "I know it's not enough." "No," Marisol agreed softly, "but it's something." They might have found their way back to each other slowly, carefully, the way grief and forgiveness usually demanded, but the world they lived in didn't allow for slowly. 3 nights later, Theo didn't come home from his evening dialysis appointment. Marisol's phone rang at 11 p.m., not Theo's number, but a blocked one. A voice she didn't recognize, calm and accented, said only, "Tell Damien Cole that Yuri Drago would like to discuss the docs. Tell him he has until sunrise. And tell him," the voice paused, almost amused, "that his brother-in-law's pretty boy has very thin blood. Wouldn't take much." The line went dead. Marisol called Damien before she'd even process her own scream. He arrived at her apartment in under 15 minutes, and the man who walked through her door was not the careful, control man from the Garden Memorials. This was the man the old woman in the cemetery had warned her about, cold-eyed, precise, every movement economical and lethal. "Drago's been trying to take the docks for 2 years," Damien said, already on the phone, already moving. "He knows about you, about us. He's using Theo to get to me." He looked at Marisol, and for one terrible moment, all his careful armor dropped away entirely. "I will get your brother back. I swear to you, Marisol, on everything." "I know," Marisol said, surprised in herself at how steady her voice was. "I know you will." What Marisol didn't expect was Vivian Castel showing up at the warehouse an hour later. Not as an enemy, but white-faced, breathless, having driven across the city the moment she heard. "It's my fault," Vivian said the moment she saw Damien. Drago approached me 3 weeks ago. He knew about the singer. He offered information in exchange for details about your security rotations, dates, routes. I thought, her voice cracked. I thought if I helped him weaken your position, you'd need my family again. Need me again. I never thought he'd go after kid Damien. I swear to God I didn't know. The betrayal hit the room like a physical blow. Marisol watched Damien's jaw tighten, watched 12 years of complicated history with Vivian Castel collapse into this single, devastating confession. You gave him my rotations, Damien said quietly. Vivian, you gave a man like Drago a map to my blind spots. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Tell me how to fix it. Please. Damien looked at her for a long, cold moment. And then, instead of the rage Marisol expected, something almost like pity crossed his face. You're going to call him back, he said. And you're going to tell him exactly where I'll be at 2 a.m. Because that's exactly where I want him to think I'll be. The exchange happened at the old grain terminal at the edge of the river. Rusted gantries, broken floodlights. The kind of place built for things that needed to happen in the dark. Marisol wasn't supposed to be there. She went anyway. She arrived in time to see Theo on his knees beside a black SUV, a man's hand gripping his shoulder, and Damien standing 30 feet away, alone, hands visible, voice carrying across the open concrete with a calm that Marisol knew, now, took everything he had to maintain. You wanted the docks, Yuri, Damien said. Take them. I'm done fighting for them. Drago, silver-haired, smiling like a man who'd already won, laughed. Just like that, the great Damien Cole gives up his family's legacy for a dialysis patient and a fat girl who sings at funerals. Something in Marisol broke at the casual cruelty of it. Not for herself, but for the years she'd spent believing words like that defined her. She stepped out from behind the gantry before she'd even decided to. My name is Marisol Vance, she said, voice ringing across the concrete with the same power she brought to every gravesite, every grieving family. Every song that had ever made a room fall silent. And the man you're underestimating just gave up everything he's ever owned to walk out here unarmed for my brother. That's not weakness, Mr. Drago. That's the only kind of man worth being afraid of. Drago's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. In that heartbeat, Damien moved, fast, brutal. 12 years of restraint unleashed in 3 seconds. Disarming the man holding Theo, put himself between the boy and the gun that came up a moment too late. A shot rang out. Damien staggered, a dark stain spreading fast across his shoulder, but he didn't go down, and in the chaos that followed, coal men pouring in from the shadows where they'd been waiting the entire time, Drago's people scattering, sirens already wailing in the distance. Marisol ran to her brother and pulled him into her arms, sobbing his name. It was over in less than a minute, but Marisol would remember every second of it for the rest of her life. Damien recovered in a hospital bed surrounded by more security than the mayor, though he complained weakly with the ghost of a smile that he'd had worse. Drago's organization collapsed within days, picked apart by federal agents who'd apparently been building a case for years, helped along by an anonymous tip that included, among other things, old shipping manifests with very specific names on them. Marisol visited him every day. On the 4th day, she brought the wooden box of letters. I want to read you something, she said, sitting beside his bed. Something my father wrote. She read him the letter, the one that ended with "Don't ever let anyone make you small, baby girl. You were never made to be small." And when she finished, Damien reached for her hand with his good arm, and she let him take it. I'm done, he said quietly. With all of it, the docs, the name, what my father built. I'm handing it over, legally, fully, to a board that answers to people who actually go to prison when they break the law. I should have done it years ago. I think I was waiting for a reason good enough. And now I have won. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was nothing guarded in his eyes at all. I'm not asking you to forget what my family did, Marisol. I'm not even asking you to forgive all of it today. But I am asking if there's any room, anywhere, for a man who spent his whole life trying to be someone his mother would have been proud of. I'd like that man to spend the rest of it trying to deserve you. Marisol thought of the rain at St. Augustine's Cemetery, of an old woman's warning, of 12 years of grief built on a lie, of letters written by a man who loved his family enough to risk everything for their future. "My father used to say love was supposed to stay," she said softly. "I spent 12 years thinking that was a fairy tale." She leaned down, pressing her forehead gently to his. "Maybe it's not a fairy tale. Maybe it's just rare. And maybe it's worth staying for when you find it." 6 months later, Marisol sang again at St. Augustine's Cemetery, but not for a funeral. The Delacroix Funeral Home had a new annex now, a small chapel built with money from a foundation that funded dialysis treatment for families who couldn't afford it, named, at Marisol's insistence, for Elias Vance. Theo stood beside her, healthy color in his cheeks for the first time in years, a transplant match having come through just weeks after Drago's fall, and what Odalise insisted was simply the universe settling old debts. And in the front row, in a simple gray suit instead of charcoal, sat a man who no longer ran anything but a small maritime charity and, increasingly, his own life, watching Marisol sing not because he needed to hear his mother's voice in someone else's, but because he loved the woman singing fully, without ghosts standing between him anymore. When the song ended, Marisol looked out at the gathered crowd. Families, survivors, people whose lives had been quietly changed by money that no longer needed to hide where it came from. And she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not small, not invisible, not waiting for someone to leave. Just home,